Hello everybody, and thanks for coming. My name is Troy Hill and I am the mayor here in Leander. I'm also a resident of Treviso, and so I did a city update in 2019. Obviously in 2020 we couldn't do one, so I thought in relation to obviously what happened in February that it would be good for us to really kind of give an update now and kind of go through from the city perspective kind of what happened, and then I also want to do an update on different things going on in the city. I'm excited about, for instance, the Osage extension and what it means for this neighborhood, because one of the most depressing things to me as mayor of Leander is the fact that most people that live here can't really be a part of Leander unless you go way around. So I'm excited that once that's done, we'll be able to cut right through to Lakeline Road, and I mean, you get to be a part of the town that you live in, which is great. So I wanted to talk again about what's going on in the city. I am going to let Rick Beverlin, our city manager, kind of give us an update on, from the city perspective, what happened in February. And just so everybody knows, and I'm sorry, this is Mike New, he's our public information officer, and this is Ross Blackletter, he is our chief engineer, and then we have Gina Ellison, our public utilities director. So, and then Jason Shaw is here, he's one of our council members. So we got the whole team. I just want to explain how our government works, and most municipal governments in Texas work this way, is that we are a council manager form of government, which means that we have elected city council members. They're at large. They don't represent any one area. So you elect, 7 people to represent you. The mayor is also a council member. The things that I can do is I preside over meetings, in certain instances with emergencies, I have some emergency power, but very limited. And then we have a city manager who is Rick, who is appointed by the city council. He is the only person in the city that we have direct supervision over, because otherwise he wouldn't be here. He's an Aggie, and that's just too much to put up with. No, but Rick is the only person that we have direct supervision over, and then Rick is really the CEO of our city. He runs all the day-to-day things and manages the staff and is in charge of everything that happens in the city. So with that, here's Rick Beverlin. I'm going to let him kind of go through kind of the events that happened in February.
Thank you, Mayor Hill, and thank you for having us out tonight. Appreciate it. And I arrived in December of 19, so we kind of rolled to COVID shortly thereafter. It's one of the reasons I haven't made all the rounds yet, so it's been an interesting ride so far in this 14 months or so. But let me kind of give you an overview of a few things. I know y'all got to live it out here, and it's beautiful out here, but you'll have inclines, you have grades, and then you had a series of things from Atmos gas to the electric piece to the water piece. So I'll kind of walk y'all through things, and several of us were in real time. Sorry, it's me that's left. Several of us in real time were also at the EOC, Emergency Operations Center, while this was going on. In the times we weren't doing that, we were trying to sleep in our own bed without electricity. We were also in communication with the various entities. We're back with the EOC. So Gina is an example. I think she's definitely some time off her life she's not going to get back after being the EOC as well. Let's talk about the Atmos gas piece. So that was earlier in the event. Atmos, and they're the gas provider for Treviso and throughout the city. So they actually have a pipeline system. I forget how far away the entire pipeline system goes, but their primary, their closest station where they can actually even fill trucks is in Temple. So basically they're piping natural gas all the way to Leander, all the way to Treviso. Where y'all lie right now is towards the end of their line. So that's one issue. And it was, and Gina, you probably remind me, Mike can, that would have been over that week, that initial weekend of the storm, that they first contacted us.
Saturday.
And let us know that based on the pressures from the gas generators, not meaning generators, but the gas producers, that they were having pressure issues. And so we signed an emergency order to go ahead and let them run an additional temporary line across the golf course. With that line, they were supposed to be able to run additional trucks, which they were. I think they ran 4 trucks. I think they had 2 at any given moment and kept them in rotation a ton. Well, Murphy, best laid plans, that worked up to the point that they couldn't get enough traction to keep coming in and out safely. So at that point, they made the decision is rather than lose a larger portion of the gas grid to go ahead and shut off, I guess those like to be known as, I guess, the 600 within Treviso.
I'm one of the lucky ones too.
That was the decision that they decided to make, because they felt like if they didn't do that, it was going to be a much larger area of the city. And truthfully, this is a situation where those that went through that net sacrifice actually, who knows what the larger impact would have been. But I believe that we were led to believe it was going to be probably in the thousands if that would have occurred. Now, we don't regulate Atmos. They fall under the Railroad Commission. And those of y'all from Texas may know, those of y'all not from Texas, the Railroad Commission, oil and gas related regulations, I know it may not make sense, but they're the entity that regulates them at the state level. That being said, our discussions with Atmos, they have indicated, and also in the Saturday session that they did as well, that they're working with the developer on an 8-inch line on Osage, which should, when that is completed, again, you can only try to play out all the potential scenarios of potential failure. If everything upstream with the gas providers goes afoul, then, if there's a pressure issue, who knows, the whole city could lose it under a different scenario. But their assurance to us is that from a technical standpoint should alleviate something like this from happening under the same set of circumstances coming down the pipe. So that's really the Atmos piece. You can see what order Mike has.
I've got it up on there. This is the phase 5. You can see the Osage Drive extension and future connection with Durango Hills. So that infrastructure piece, building of that road, Atmos is tying in their infrastructure extension along with that project, right, to minimize construction costs, but also just do it in conjunction. So I think he said maybe 7 to 8 weeks to complete that project, and this is Atmos talking directly to us. But this is the general location in the Treviso subdivision, and you're looking at some of the future pieces there of phase 5. So that Atmos 8-inch gas line extension will be in conjunction with Osage Drive in the upper right, and that connection all the way across. And that's expected to serve Treviso at full build out.
One question, is that still the only route in case construction like we've seen in the water hits? Is there another route in to get gas in?
That's the second.
Yeah, I think there's another, I don't know where their other inlet is, but they've got another connection into the subdivision as well.
This would be the second connection.
This is the second. All right, so there is.
It does create a sort of a loop inside Treviso to ensure that connectivity. And again, they are keeping compressed natural gas trucks. I think somewhere in this construction site, and even if they have to, they would keep them over near our Fire Station 5 site, just in case. And it's a 99% effective solution unless the roads are iced up, which is a problem that we had. So it is being worked on as we speak, and it will, again, I think 7 to 8 weeks is probably the timeline that they gave us.
And keep in mind, now, granted, I come from Galveston, so yes, this kind of freeze doesn't happen, but even in the hill country, I have one set of grandparents from Atlanta. This kind of freeze doesn't happen about every 75 or 100 years. So that's the other issue, is this was a very different event. If you look at some of the statewide information, unfortunately, when you look at really what the threat matrix is, these are not necessarily the type of things that most systems have been designed for. And that is something that it doesn't mean we can't design for it moving forward in the future. Obviously, there is a cost associated with it, so we can talk more about that when we get into the water piece as well. Did you want to talk a little bit? You want to talk a little bit about water in general?
Well, why don't we?
Or you want to talk about?
Why don't we? The sequence was okay. Then we started having the rolling blackouts.
Correct.
So maybe touch on that.
And then you can probably get to it. So, as y'all may have probably read by now, as the storm event, as it got colder, the ERCOT started, in communication with their providers, started ordering effectively blackouts and what they were calling a shed of power across the system. The idea was, at least what's come out so far, is that they would have otherwise lost the entire state. Now, believe me, as my father told me, politics ain't a science, and that degree is not a real science, political science from Cougar High. But that being said, the whole system was greatly stressed. Counterparts that I have in other parts of the state where we did have interruptions, some of them had 3 solid days of no electricity whatsoever. Others where they did, let's say down on the Gulf Coast, where they did have, mostly because of FEMA and prior hurricanes, they actually did have, in their case, generators. Now, many of them had diesel generators, but they were also running out of fuel during the storm. So it goes back to, is it a 1% event? Is that what you're going to design for? Is it a 20% event? Or are these things going to become more frequent? So in terms of our water plants, we have, and this is the thing to really talk about, so put some perspective. So we have 2 water plants. One is the BCRUA regional partnership between the city of Leander, Cedar Park, and Round.
It's 5 minutes from here. It's up on by the QT. If you take that road, it's just right down that road. And then you turn on one of these little side streets and it's right there.
And that plant's, under best circumstances, is how many million gallons? 20?
BCRUA is 32.
Okay, 32 million gallons
It's a region.
per day. And our percentage of it is 43%.
Correct. We're
So
14.9.
call it around 15 million gallons a day. Now, there goes Murphy again. So, this is a regional plant. It was constructed in 2000 and...
They finished the first phase in 2012.
Okay, so it's pretty new, I would think. Now, the intake to the plant, actually the pipe to the intake at the bottom of Lake Travis broke off due to structural failure of the supports. So,
That was like November, right?
December. That was
December.
December.
Okay.
So your primary plant, your largest producer, was out of the picture before you even entered the storm. So you're already down your primary. You're effectively on your secondary system heading into the storm.
And try to give them a sense of why it's taking so long to get that fixed.
Okay, so dive teams, since that has went down, what's the total depth of
It's
that?
about 60 feet.
Okay, so you take that, plus you take the cold, and then you take anything in the storm event. So you had to first diagnose what the problem was and how you were going to fix it, because this was not built in the middle section. It was built, I guess, end to end originally. So, as it's scheduled right now, they should be in full operation by the 9th. Okay. So, that obviously didn't help us leading into the storm because our other plant, which the city didn't build either, it was purchased from LCRA. This is what happens when you have a newer city. The Sandy Creek Water Treatment Plant is designed, I think originally it's about 12 million gallons a day, but effectively runs at 10 and a half,
Yeah,
11 million gallons a day. So that is the only plant we had leading into the storm. But there's more. So, in terms of the electrical feeds, so as you see the little PEC logos, so that was actually well timed.
It's true.
Little Kenny Loggins there. So you have two PEC substations feeding into each of those plants. So you have two separate lines, and they both have an automatic transfer switch. Well, you can cross out the PCRUA plant because it was not in operation at the end of the storm. Then roll to the ERCOT command to shed. Now, we have from PEC in writing, as a response to City Council, what did they deem as critical infrastructure during the storm? The only answer we have received is hospitals. And that's what has basically been received across the state, different energy providers. ERCOT said shed. So that being said, there were, of those two lines, they were both being hit. They were hit in increasing intervals. So those tanks have to keep filling up. After you get to low is how you will get to a boil water notice. We were in contact with PEC throughout the event. They were going from several hours apart. They hit it a total of 14 times? 14 times it was hit in terms of turning the power off to shed that load. And the intervals got closer and closer. I think the last was 5 hours.
The duration of them got longer.
Correct.
I think we had two that were over 5 hours.
And the other issue, which was not discovered until afterwards by PEC, during the storm event, they did not discover it. Well, one of the two feeds
It was the nameless feed.
had a transformer blown or thrown.
Breaker
A
switch.
breaker, okay. So they didn't even know why it was not flipping over to power on the other line because, again, they were having enough trouble getting their crews out during the event. So that kind of gives you a bit of kind of the tier of issues, what had occurred, including one that had occurred in December leading into the event. And then in terms of the redundancies, now we have checked with, keep in mind, where I've primarily been, most of the cities do have generators, but for different reasons have been paid for by FEMA over time because your entire water plants have been wiped out, get a FEMA grant. The threat matrix up here is very different, or at least it historically has been. So, Round Rock.
Round Rock has generators at their intake.
At their intake, okay. But several of the other cities, I'd say the majority of them, do not have any generators because by and large, and probably the same reason most of y'all moved here, this has been a more moderate climate. It's not, you don't have the coastal issues, you don't have the tornadoes, you have some wind, and you typically don't have freezes this hard for this long. So, I mean, we even found several cities that are even larger than us that even just have single feeds to their water plants. So they don't even have an automatic transfer switch. And that obviously is it a wake-up call? Probably is to everybody because I don't think it was something that most folks have said, okay, in their lifetime, that's never happened. So there's always that first time. Do we want to go through, let's want to talk about ECRUA a little bit?
Does anybody have any questions so far?
Do we have water storage systems here? Like, do we store water in the city?
We do.
How many days of water do we store?
So we have 6.5 million gallons of storage capabilities. In the city, we have 3 elevated tanks and green ground storage tanks installed. So
And then in the
that's
CIP, how many more are we building?
Gabriel.
We're building one elevated storage tank on San Gabriel East Pump Station. We have plans for an additional elevated, actually a ground storage tank and a pump station on the west end of Baghdad.
Oh, as part of the second phase of this.
Right.
Well, in this area, our tower is about right across from Randall's. You can see it from Randall's, just to the east.
Crystal.
So it's right there. So that's why, crazy as it seems, a lot of people in lower elevations did not lose water in this neighborhood, for instance. And in areas around the water tower along Lake Line, up Mason Hills, parts of Crystal Falls, they never lost water. They're so close to the tank and it's gravity fed, so they never lost water.
So some of the people are concerned about the water shortage, and do we have enough water to support this area?
There's probably the near term, looking out, deep water intake, that's looking at how many years?
2027.
Okay. Well, no, that's the actual, but once it's implemented, how many years after that?
Ultimate.
On paper, ultimate. So
We have enough. When when we built BCRUA years ago, our city at the time purchased acre feet as if we were totally built out of water rights.
24,000.
So as long as there's water in that lake, it has our name on it, right? The question becomes long term, how many people are taking water out of that lake? Because, for instance, in 2011, at the height of the drought, there was probably 1 million people taking water out of Lake Travis. Today, there's 2 million people taking water out of Lake Travis. By 2030, it's going to be 3 million people. So, in my opinion, the real question is, the lake hasn't gotten any bigger, but now there's twice as many people taking water from it. We have the acre feet reserved. Now, LCRA will tell us and tell you, anybody in this room, there is not a problem with water, that they have plenty of water. But in 2011, there was a problem. So, we've got a real big, question, and that is, we have a barge that the intake sits on. And so it's not in the deepest part of the lake. So the 2 other cities that we're in, and our city, had decided we'll move it to the deeper part of the lake. Well, we own 48% of that plant. So the reason that your water bills are a certain amount before you even turn on any water is because you're paying for the bonds that were used to build that plant. And we took on 48% of the cost of building the plant. So we get more water than the other 2 cities, but it also means that we're paying high water costs than what they pay. So good, bad, we can all agree or disagree whether that was the prudent thing to do, but it was made a long time before I was even in this city. So,
and that project was originally estimated at 90 million. Right now, you're looking at 110 million. I believe.
to move
the barge further.
the vacuum
I'm
into
sorry,
the
there's 2 parts to that. Let's make sure we let everybody know. One is to move it deeper, and 2 is to increase the capacity.
correct.
So that's a 2 on the deep
Yeah.
water intake. It's not just putting it deeper in the lake. It is opening up that so we have the actual MG, the million gallons a day, whatever that ends up being, we have to have that capacity.
So what we've been looking at, the last probably couple of years is, do we need a second water source? I personally, my own opinion, after meeting, I believe that we do. There are other people that are not of that opinion. They say that Lake Travis has plenty of water. And look, it depends on who you ask.
We are wrapping up an official study that's looking at that long-term piece.
What we did before, because our city had never done an extensive water study before. So what we did is, knowing that if we get this wrong and we spend $100 million on moving the vacuum, if you will, further out in the deep part of the lake, and we have a drought of record like 2011, that we're going to get rationed. So, that we were 40,000 people in 2011. We're going to be, let's say it happened in 2020. We're going to be, 2030. We could be 200,000 people by then. So, without a secondary source, that's not a really rosy picture, in my opinion. So we authorized a water study, an extensive water study. We got it back literally 2-3 weeks ago. It, quite frankly, wasn't exactly what we were looking for. So they're having to go back and adjust, because what we wanted to know as a council, look, it's like we have one bullet. We better be aiming at the right target. So should we be spending $100 million there, or should we spend it on joining 2 or 3 other cities and laying pipe to aquifers that have a 1,000-year supply of water? Depends on who you ask. But we hope that the water study would give us, really good data that we could make an informed decision.
Can we put in wells?
There's not enough water. There's not enough water beneath us. From what I mean, there's aquifers everywhere. Literally during the storm, I had a guy in Bertram call me and say, my ranch has aquifers all over, and we supply Bertram with water, and we'll give you water. Well, how much does he have? Knowing how much we need is the issue, and how much would it cost to get the water here?
Yeah, anytime you go to a groundwater source, there's going to be a cost. And I believe we also had a separate presentation for one of the entities that's already working on one of the groundwater sources.
And a lot of cities are doing that, by the way. San Antonio's doing it, Corpus Christi. There's a lot of cities looking at groundwater sources, because they tend, we have aquifers that have a lot more water than anything, on the surface has. So it could be a solution.
Could we get water from Buchanan? Could we buy?
It's part of the same system that Lake Travis. Well, so like during the, yeah, exactly. LCRA manages that. So back in the drought, Buchanan's the first lake that gets drained. I mean, it was the lowest during the drought, because the other lakes are constant level lakes, and they're that way because they produce electricity. Is that right? I don't know. Okay. But the other lakes are constant level lakes, and then that feeds into Travis. Obviously, part of the issue the last few years was, the rice farmers downstream, so that became a battle between the city of Austin, and downstream. They built a reservoir that I believe it's constructed, right? So I don't know if that started to really have an impact on releasing water downstream. I know they did it again this year. They did release water, so.
Okay, and then the right to who can take it, order, and there is even, there's folks downstream that have historic rights, whether it's agricultural or industrial, and that's just, unfortunately, it's the right. And then I believe the state also has appointed a water czar by the legislature to deal with those issues. We're actually going through the process of interviewing for executive director of capital infrastructure over CIP, water, roads, everything, because our folks here have their bandwidth is day-to-day in operations and improving designs and implementing and repairing. So that's actually what we're trying to bring to bear, is looking at all of these different plans, doing our day-to-day, but also making sure we're planning for the long term, having really the type of regional type experience that I think we're going to need moving forward. Do we want to talk about, what do you think, should we talk about ACRA a little bit more, about the volatility And this will also, this is not to, and so, tell you what this is what my heart rate looked like during the storm.
Flat for a little bit.
Yeah, there's a line that goes back up and forth. And so this goes back to 13. That's right after they came online. So this gives you an idea of how many times our primary water source plant has been down. Now, early on, yes, you had 2 months there in construction. And you had 2 years just at repair and construction.
We'll leave that to construction. I'm getting more details on that.
Okay, then you had another 5 months, December 18 to May.
Different phases of construction.
Then y'all decided to go through 6 months of it back to construction a month before I got here. Thank you. Was continued over. And then the water intake decides to, I did water intake, the intake goes down or the pipe goes down in December of 20. So in the grand scheme of things, and I don't know if we can come up with a similar historical of Sandy Creek.
Well, Sandy Creek is the dark blue.
Yeah, you can see
So,
Sandy Creek sees
The
it.
dark
It's
blue dash.
definitely closer to a, let's say,
So this is BCRUA, and then this is Sandy Creek. And then this is combined water usage.
but I'm talking about in terms of their interruption.
Yeah, so you would see a similar.
You would see
process.
the similar, if they went offline, you would see it drop to, so they.
Oh, totally off. So it hasn't dropped. It's never totally dropped off
Correct.
in that entire period. So and that plant is how much,
20
twice as old.
plus, 20 plus.
One thing I think is important to touch on is that, I think the perception because of the boil water notices that we had last year was that there is a persistent problem. So we had 3 boil water notices for Treviso, right, last year. 2 of those were one occurrence, and it was the Osage extension where a water line was not where it should have been and was hit during construction. And then what were they capping it off? That was actually 3? Okay.
3 of the 5 have been related to that, and that water line was installed 7 years ago. 7 years ago. So it's a necessary evil to fix it now. We're not making any excuses for anything. We're not pointing fingers at anybody, but it should have been 4 feet deeper.
16.
10
10 feet deep. Okay, that shows you why I wasn't an engineering major.
It has been bypassed. We're in the process of lowering it now.
But so last year when we had the boil water notice during the summer, one of the things that came out of it was this question about, okay, well, now that one was a power outage. Again, the big plant was offline. We're working off of the smaller plant. It can supply the whole city, right? Well, we had a power outage 4 o'clock in the morning. It's supposed to switch over. It didn't for whatever reason. But it came to light that both plants couldn't service all of the city. So what we did as a council was we authorized and fast-tracked the piping that is being done. I guess they've already started on it. Yeah, and that will give both plants the ability to service the entire city, which again is a backup system in case you have problems with either one. So we have made improvements that will kind of prevent, what has happened, because theoretically, the chances of even both plants being off, even if there was rotating blackouts, it could have been a different outcome. So anyway.
With the water shortage, and getting back to Lake Travis, is there a way that, or maybe there is, to tap into Lake Austin?
Well, that's part of the whole chain as well. Yeah. Yeah.
So you tap off, okay.
Yeah. Yep. And by the way, Austin has one source today. Austin's in the same situation. You know, they're in the deeper part of the lake, but in 2011, they got to a point where they were about to start pumping effluent back into the lake. So that's not a pretty picture, but you know, that's where we were. And so every city is looking at the growth that we've got versus projections and trying to come up with 2 or 3 different sources. So at the end of his, I want to talk a little bit about conservation and the things that we're looking at.
Do you know what the capacity is now on the lake?
For the lake? You mean like in acre feet of the lake?
The water capacity, the reservoir. I think I saw 60 something, 64.
About 70,
Is it?
75%.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
It looks
And I mean, actually, yes, theoretically it's
for so long.
Over, yeah.
yeah. I mean, it was bad in 2011, even up to 2015.
I think it was 35 to 36%.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did you want to talk about, in the summer, that boil water notice in terms of, one, this will help correct some of that, how we lost water pressure. And now, of course, you had, for the first time, everybody's home at the same time. You had COVID, but I'm gonna let you speak to it from a functional, operational perspective.
Right. So traditionally, typically we see our peak water usage days towards the end of the week, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So when that little power interruption happened, it wasn't any longer than 30 minutes. It caused one of our backup computer systems to fail on the plant. And so when it did that, everything went offline and all of the basins and everything emptied into, it's a little more technical, sorry, into our lagoons and basically stirred them all up. So when the plant came back online, it was essentially sucking kind of stirred up water, and it had to filter it more. It was a little bit harder to treat efficiently because they were so stirred up. So that kind of goes back to what the mayor will talk about in a little bit. Our conservation efforts is we're trying to smooth out those curves, those demand curves, and maybe not have those really high usage days back to back with the residential watering and everything like that. Did I touch on it?
Yeah,
that was a little
I think so.
What we're talking about is
Sure.
heats.
Sure, so you can see the orange line is our usage combined between the two plants. So you can see the peaks, and these are the summer peaks, and we go down every winter, which is why winter is kind of the optimal time to do construction, maintenance, really your heavy activities. So you can see overall, obviously, our combined usage continues to grow over. So we're just trying to keep those down as much as we can as far as the residential watering.
That goes back to the days that having it spread, where the days that folks water, and also the conservation piece. Did you want to talk about the purple pipe?
Yeah.
So,
I'm sorry.
I had a question. Why is the newer pump just going down so often? Is there an inherent problem while construction of that plant?
It's phased differently, so I don't quite have all the details on the first phase and the second phase, but recently the one that just came online in May of this year increased our capacity or our ability to take water from 10.55 to 14.9. So they're continuing to expand and phase the construction of the plant. So those are some of those ones where it goes offline, it's doing more construction to continue to grow the plant.
And those are planned.
And they're
Those
planned,
previous
yeah.
ones.
Talk about December, then, Gina.
I was gonna say, the most recent one was not a planned one, and that was what Rick was talking about with the raw water line, the foundation failure. So that was the only one I know of that was a failure.
And I mean, those are talks that we're having. We have a management team that is, are they Round Rock employees? Is that right? In BCRUA?
The plant is run by city of Leander employees.
Okay.
However, the management team itself is paid by all three cities.
Okay. So that plant is shared by us, Round Rock, and Cedar Park. So Round Rock, you know, in talk, number one, just remember, we purchased enough acre feet to get us to total built out of 250,000. So if there's if there's water in Lake Travis, remember it's got our name on it. However, you know, what can we do also from our end? You know, Round Rock has, I think, done the best job of any city around here in using reclaimed water. So I'll give you a great example. When I got on council 2015, we were losing about as much as $300,000 a year on the golf course. Well, when we did the Treviso lift station, oh, sorry, get in front of the camera. When we did the lift station over here, the plant, the light water plant, and we started using reclaimed water to water the golf course. Now we flip that, we make money on the golf course. So what it tells you is that just that one thing is huge for larger water users. Round Rock, I had an extensive conversation with their mayor. They didn't start even taking water out of BCRUA, even though they've been paying on it for years, because in his opinion, the reclaimed water worked so well that it cut their consumption by 20%. So they started requiring it from different developments. Treviso is our only subdivision that uses reclaimed water. Is that right? Pretty sure it is. But we have it on Thursday's agenda to look at coming up with a system-wide map, if you will. You know, and it may be that we can't retrofit, but it may be that we can, going forward on new subdivisions, start requiring it. You know, also I think there are things like xeriscape. You know, why do we have so much grass on medians? Do we really need it on medians? You know, so I think these kind of questions are questions that we can ask. You know, and you know, the questions that I'm seeing out there are, hey, are we going to run out of water in 8 years? No, we're not going to run out of water in 8 years. You know, there are different options, and we need to address it now before we become 150 to 200,000 people, and we are, but we're not going to run out of water. That's not going to happen. And if that runs out of water, it's going to be a lot of people in trouble, not just Leander, Texas. But I believe that we do need a secondary source, regardless of whether we move the intake into the deeper part of the lake or not. I just think it's a prudent thing to do, so that if you do have another 100-year drought, we seem to be having a lot of 100-year everythings, you know. But if you do, then at least you have something else, because otherwise you're going to get your usage curtailed, you know. So I personally think that's something, and we are looking at it. And again, we've got a water study that's going to tell us things like this. And then the second thing I hear is, why do we sell water? Well, when you sell water, number one, a lot of water that we sell, we're treating for somebody else. They have to secure the acre feet with LCRA and Lake Travis themselves, cities like Liberty Hill, for instance. But we sell water to some neighborhoods that are outside the city limits. It makes sense, because when you're selling water, they can help you pay for those infrastructure improvements, like moving the intake out or laying pipe to an aquifer that's 150 miles away. It makes absolute sense to do it. So those are some of the questions that we ask. And then growth, you know, hey, should we just stop growing? No, that is not the answer. Number one, there's not really an effective way to stop growth. Why? It would be like you selling your house. Would you like the government telling you you couldn't sell your house? No, you wouldn't, and you would sue the government. That's exactly what would happen with all these ranches that are going to sell in the next 10 years. You know, they would sue us. They would sue anybody that tried, and Texas is a land rights state. So it's not the growth itself, it's how you manage the growth. And, you know, definitely the water is a huge thing. The people that were around 10 to 15 years ago thought they had it down by securing the acre feet, you know, taking on 48% ownership so that we kind of call the shots at this water plant. You know, unfortunately, you know, now we found some issues. We've already fixed a lot of them right there. You know, we do have on our agenda this week to discuss a backup generator. You know, the question is, as a city, do you want to spend $1.5 million on a generator that you may use every 30 years. And by the way, Round Rock had a generator. I talked to their mayor after the storm. They almost gave up because they couldn't get the fuel truck in. It's diesel powered. And they couldn't get the fuel truck in because of the ice. So it's not a 100% sure solution either way. You know, I personally think that, you know, the state, and I just read on the way here that in the legislature, they're trying to mandate that that different municipalities do all these continual upgrades. So the state is addressing it in the legislature. Hopefully something good will come out of it. And as for us, we are looking for the future. Right now, we do not have a water shortage. We do not. We do have things that we need to do to address the redundancy of the system. We did. And also probably looking forward, what are we going to do? Are we going to, you know, put all our eggs in this basket, or are we going to look outside? Those are things that we have to deal with, and we are. Any questions?
Did you get any FEMA grant from the last storm?
And actually, you know, that is a possibility, looking at the generator cost. So that could be something that comes out of that storm that might help us out.
And plus the most recent Recovery Act bill, I believe we have approximately 13 million, give or take, by formula that the city that is eligible for the city to apply for, and that it does include, in terms of infrastructure and water, wastewater, is on that list. Now, one thing I might say is it is kind of like gambling to a degree. If you have multiple plants and you have power that could go out in multiple places, it may not be just one generator. It may be a series of generators for enough redundancy. And what fuel? I mean, is it dual fuel? Is it diesel and then tied to natural gas? As we see, I don't need to tell you all, natural gas may not be there. Does it need to have a diesel backup? So those are some things that I think we'll talk about this week.
I want to further complicate the situation, though. Can I please? So in Texas, the Brazos River Authority, the BRA, of which most of our water in Leander, most of everything in Leander drains into the Brazos River, right? This part of Leander drains into Lake Travis. Yet we get our water from Lake Travis. So we have to do an interlocal transfer to be able to buy water, because Texas was set up back in the ranching days, and water rights were huge, right? Especially for agriculture, ranching. And look, I mean, it's confusing. It's very, very, very confusing. So the reason I tell you that, okay. The reason I tell you that is it's complicated. And it's complicated, a lot of it, in my opinion, by Texas laws that have been this way for so long and need to probably be adjusted to reflect the amount of growth that we have had in Texas and in areas like Central Texas. So it's got to be handled. We have to handle what we can handle. I'm telling you, the state's going to have to handle they're going to have to change some things, because water is going to be, I mean, Texas is growing at such a fast rate. I mean, look what's going on here. You want to sell your house, it'll be gone tomorrow. You know, if you put it on today, it could be sold tomorrow. There's such a high demand. Do what?
You can sell it in 20 minutes.
I know, but then where would you go? You know, that's the next question. So anyway, this is an issue that is affecting everybody in Texas. You know, there's not an easy long-term solution. I know more about water than I ever wanted to know about water, because, you know, you start looking at aquifers, and, you know, the tough thing is, you know, we could talk to Bill over here and he says, man, don't invest in the lake. you got to lay pipe to this aquifer. Oh, by the way, that's what my company does. You know, and then Fred over here says, no, you got to do this because his company does engineering for barges. So trying to find somebody that literally will give you the right answer that has no quote unquote dog in the hunt has proved very challenging. And that's what we hope that the water study will do. So look, number one, please be assured we are not going to run out of water. Growth has nothing to do with what happened in February, nothing. 3, we need to grow. I mean, we're going to grow. So the question is, how do we want to grow? And I think we're growing the right way. And 4, I said 4, but it pointed at my thumb. I do believe that a recycled program and thinking about things, and I know you guys moved from California, just the zero-scape kind of landscapes going forward. Our biggest users are not commercial developments, and the lagoon didn't have anything to do with this. They are residential and schools. So those are things that we can do something about. So we just have to rethink, how we do it. So
one thing that did come up after the first boil water notice, when that occurred, we went back and had the modelers actually rerun the water model, which was run around 2017, and this was interesting. You had, I guess, across a decade, 100% plus, 100% increase in population over the time frame they looked at.
But it was the consumption.
But the consumption per lot per capita, just per capita, was 130%, I think. So your people, not just more people, but each person was using more moving forward. Now, this is where the zero-scape or the purple pipe or all these other things hopefully will come into play, is that we do think somewhere along the way the housing product changed some. And so, let's say your house that was 250,000, 300,000 might not have come with irrigation 10, 15 years ago. Today, they all come with it. Even their small lot homes do. So that is one of the things right now that we do need to try to conserve if we can. That probably would have helped at any given point, even if we had an interruption in terms of usage in our storage tanks and all the other storage tanks that y'all will be paying for, which are being designed. So.
And I do want to address the growth. So every apartment complex that you see in Leander that is under construction or built was approved a long time ago, number one. So just in the last 3 years, for instance, we have approved the very first one, and it was the one with the lagoon. And they sit on top of an aquifer, or they sit on top of a aquifer, and they own water rights. And so they will be filling that lagoon out of a well that they have on the property and probably drilling a second well. So it has nothing to do with our water supply and will not pull from our water supply unless we want them to, unless we say, hey, you want to buy some water? So it doesn't have anything to do with it. But something that our council felt was important was that we were getting too many apartments in the city. And it isn't just a matter of water, it's infrastructure like roads. So, we have kind of said as a council that we want to kind of put the brakes a little bit on the higher density type projects. And we have, absolutely. So we have tapped the brakes on that. So we're emphasizing commercial type businesses because from a tax-based perspective, we need that. We get 50% of our revenue from property taxes. In my opinion, that's too high. We need other businesses to kind of even that out some. We have lowered our taxes for 6 straight years. I think we can continue to do that while we are growing because I do think they are a little bit too high, and we need to be competitive with other sister cities around us that are quite a bit lower than ours. So we do need commercial. We will grow. Every city around Austin is growing. We just need to do it the right way, and we also need to be mindful of things like water and things like roads. And we're doing the very first traffic study as well. And we may need to rethink traffic how we're doing traffic. Personally, the answer to traffic isn't to put a new light at every single subdivision that decides to build along a road, because drive 1431 to 35 and you'll know why. That's not the answer. The answer is to figure out a way where people can be safe coming out and into their neighborhoods and not slow down traffic. That's the answer.